Hey guys, we are in the middle of July and it is hot. It is 9 o'clock in the morning right now and it is 33 degrees Celsius, which I think is about 91 Fahrenheit. It's really hot and this is the time of year where my plants start slowing down. It gets too hot for pretty much everything and all of my plants start going dormant. So this is usually when I come down and just try and do garden maintenance. I try and keep them hydrated. I cut them back, hoping that I'll get a second flush in the autumn. I put on some compost to help keep them healthy, like a compost tea. And I treat any powdery mildew that's starting to appear. Now, that usually happens kind of the beginning of August. We're a bit fast this season. But as you can see, I've done none of those things. And the garden is looking like a bit of a weedy mess. And that's not just because I'm lazy and it's really hot and I don't want to be down here doing it. It's because we've had some bad news. They are selling my garden. For any of you that don't know, my name is Peggy and I am growing a cut flower garden here on my allotment in Kanagawa Prefecture, Japan, which is just south of Tokyo in USDA Zone 9B. Thanks for checking out my channel. So if you've been following along, you'll know that I was in Scotland for 6 weeks over this summer before my sister's wedding, and it was smack in the middle of June, which meant that the garden was left when it was blooming and looking beautiful. And when I came back, it was a big weedy mess. There were some flowers in there, but mostly a big weedy mess. And not only that, I had come home to find a letter saying that the land, which I thought was owned by the city council, turns out it's not, it's just the gardens are leased through them, they've sold it. So where I live is a really upcoming area, and because of the COVID pandemic, it changed how everyone in Japan works. Before COVID, there was pretty much no working from home. It was a really rare thing, and now so many places do it that people have realized they don't have to be paying the high rents in Tokyo, and they're moving to somewhere where they can get more room and have a nicer lifestyle, but within commuting distance of Tokyo, which is exactly where we are. And so really in the last kind of 4 years, all of the land around here is selling up super fast, and I'm guessing that's what's happened here. So we have been told that by the end of August, kind of beginning of September, we need to have everything out of here, and they're selling the garden. So I only got my lease back on this garden in February, and it was supposed to be a 4-year lease. So I have gone ahead and planted in all of my perennials. I put in all of my bulbs thinking that they would be there and they could grow and give me more flowers the next year. And I spent a long time kind of future-proofing the garden so that every year I would have a little bit less work to do, a little bit less money to invest into it, and more flowers. Yeah, so that's not going to happen. But I'm going to address all of that in another video, which I might title, Crap, What Do We Do Now? Yeah. But because of that, it means this is about as far as my garden is going to get this year. Usually I cut everything back and give it a rest in the really hot August sun and hope that I get a second flush come the autumn. Obviously, I'm not going to be able to do that this time. So I'm going to have to just deal with what's here, take what I can over the next couple of weeks, and then start to think about what's going to happen to everything that's in here. But for today, because of that, I know I just did my spring review last week, but here we go with my summer flower review. Let's have a look. Okay, so first up we had my Yarrow. Now I have tried to grow this before and I could never ever get it started. But this year I started it earlier than usual and then planted it out, and it's done really well. When I came back from Scotland, this was blooming so much. I think I'd missed quite a lot of it, which is kind of an ongoing story through the garden, you'll see as we go through the review. But it's still putting flowers out for me. It's drying really well and I'm really liking it. It's still putting some stuff out as well. It's one of the last ones to kind of slow down. So I'm really loving this as a filler, as something. I'm using it as, I'm leaving it on quite tall stems and using it as kind of bushy. I can't put up a photo to explain this, but I quite like the wild looking arrangements, and this kind of stands as a tall but fuller flower that I can use in those kind of wild garden style arrangements. So I'm really loving my Yarrow. And I want this to come with me because it is a perennial and it should come back for me every year. So behind my Yarrow, I had my Lupin. They did absolutely nothing. They came up tiny. They were giving me teeny tiny little flowers on them. I was cutting them to see if more would come back and I was getting nowhere. Let me know if you've grown Lupin, if that's what they're like in the first year. They might come back up here, although when I got back from Scotland, they'd completely died off. There was no sign that there had ever been anything there. So yeah. Lupin's not a flower that I was really in love with anyway. It was more I saw the people trying it, so I thought, okay, I'll try this and see if it works well. But honestly, I think I've got a few too many spike flowers in my garden, so it was an experiment. It didn't work here, and I'm not sure if I'll try it again. Yeah, I don't know. But they are completely gone. There's no sign of them at all. Next to them is this, which was an Ami that came up. Now, I've planted Ami in the past, but I didn't actually plant any this year. This one must have self-seeded and come up. Now, Ami is a biennial, I think. It can be an annual or a biennial. What little I got from it, I really liked. And although I tried growing it in the past, it didn't work very well. But this is one I might try growing again because I do enjoy having it. And it does seem to last a little better than my Daucus, which we'll talk about a few plants down. Next I have Rebeca. Look at my Rebeca. Okay, it doesn't look great now. It looked absolutely banging when I got back from Scotland. There were so many blooms. I'd missed a lot of them, and I think things are suffering because I wasn't here deadheading them and getting those other blooms to come through. So a lot of them were just dying in place, and that's kind of held back the fresh blooms from coming. This is one that I cut back really heavily though when I got back, and it's only taken a couple of weeks to get back and be producing flowers for me again. So I am absolutely loving this. I grew Rebeca because I don't like sunflower, and I thought that a lot of them kind of look the same summery vibe as sunflower, and they have. They last really well in the vase, they fill out an arrangement, and there's so many different colours of them. I absolutely love them. These are a perennial. Some of these I put in last year, some of them I grew from seed. Again, this is one I had a really hard time getting to germinate in years past, but I started it earlier this year and it did really, really well. So I got lots of them. I've got lots of different sizes of flowers, colours of flowers. I absolutely love them, and like I say, they are a perennial, so this is one that I'm going to try and keep. Okay, next to my Rebeca I had Cosmos. Now, I didn't grow as much Cosmos this year as I usually do because it doesn't grow well here. It is too wispy, it cannot stand the heat, it crunches up and it dies. I only grew the double click this time, and I'm having the same problem as I had with it before, where the flowers are just, can you see how many mosquitoes are flying around my head right now? I swear there's like 20 of them. I only grew the double click, and I'm having the same problem in that the flowers are too heavy for the stems. The stems come up super skinny, the flowers have so many petals on that they just droop over and they don't stand up very well. So I'm not going to grow this again. What I will say is that I put this in quite late, although I went by the instructions on the back of the packet as to when to plant this, and I just feel it's too late here. I'm noticing that a lot of the wild gardens, a lot of the parks and stuff I see have this coming up much earlier. So if I plant this again, I'm not going to be planting the double click. The only one I've found so far that I really like is the cupcake. Those big cupcake flowers are amazing. Don't have a good vase life, but they add a lot to an arrangement if you just want a short-lived arrangement, say for a dinner party or for a wedding or an event or something. They look great. I am going to be planting my Cosmos earlier, and I'm not going to pinch it. Now, this is kind of controversial, but it's something I'm going to try. I just feel like mine Cosmos needs to come up as quickly as possible, and if you pinch it, then you're setting the flowers back. You're going to get more flowers, but you're setting them back, and for me, by the time the flowers are really bushing out and getting to their maximum, it's getting too hot here and they just die off. So if I plant this again, I'm going to be planting them earlier. I'm going to be planting them closer together because they don't really get very bushy, especially if I'm not going to be pinching them. So that's my plan for my Cosmos. Next to my Cosmos, you can see my Daucus dara. This Daucus dara, man, I mean, it was dead, it was alive, it's dead, it was alive, and I got some cuts off it before they were fully open because I knew it was going to get crunchy too fast. If I was living somewhere cooler, I would love this. It's the perfect flowers, it's the nice airy texture. It's something that I really want to be able to grow, but I've just got to admit it's too much work, too much hassle, and doesn't give me enough to grow it in this climate. So Daucus is out. You're out. Okay, and then in front of the Daucus I have my weed patch. Yep, this is meant to be Statice and Lisianthus. Now, I've tried to grow Statice before and I've never been very successful with it, but I'm okay with that because it's not something I love. It's something I like to have dried, but I feel for my kind of arrangements, it's just a bit too stiff. It's kind of like a block. It's the same reason that I don't grow Cellulosa, which I know a lot of other people grow. I'm just not into that. It's a bit too fixed in shape. So, I mean, I've got some, it's still flowering a little, but for the amount of work it took to get that, it's not worth it. The only Statice I will grow again is the Statice Caspia, and that's kind of closer to a baby's breath one, but with more distinct flowers on it. It doesn't dry quite as well, as in the flowers don't last, but it still looks very nice and is more of a wispy, airy element, and I like that. In front of that was supposed to be my Lisianthus. These Lisianthus. Now, I know that most people that grow on a commercial scale will buy in Lisianthus plugs, and I can never really figure it out. I'm like, that's so expensive, why would you do that? I know, and now I know. It's just, they need so much babying. They are so slow to grow, and they're still to produce any flowers, nothing. They're still about this big. Now, I've been growing these since last September, and they're this big. And honestly, right now, they've been overgrown by weeds. If I can dig these out, they are a perennial, so it is once you've kind of got them started, that should be them. Again, though, I see that commercial growers are buying in plugs every year, so I don't know if they slow down over time. There's about 4 or 5 in there that I might try and dig through the weeds and dig out, but honestly, Lisianthus isn't one of those flowers that I really love either. I think it's quite an old-fashioned flower, and I know that you get a lot of flowers per stem because they are multi-stemmed, and so it fills out an arrangement nicely. It's just not with a flower I particularly like. Oh my god, mosquitoes. Okay, next row is Sweet William. I was really hoping this would flower for me this season, and it hasn't. It has bushed up. This is when I started from seed. It's bushing up really well, it's getting big, it's getting tall, but there are no flowers on it. This one is a perennial, so I'm hoping if I can get a chance to move it somewhere else that it'll survive a transplant and hopefully will be an early spring flower for me next year. But there's not really much I can say about it, other than it has filled out a lot more than I thought it would. It's taking up quite a lot of space. Now that's good because it suppresses the weeds, but when it starts to flower, I don't know if I'm going to put these too close together or not. But yeah, let's wait and see. This is still I'm not quite sure about this one. Okay, this is my scabious, and this flowered when I was in Scotland, and so I didn't see it at all. Now, last year I planted a scabious, and it was this one, the little purple pincushion one, and this is actually the plant from last year that's only just coming back now. So this is one that I started from seed in about September, and this is one that's been in since last season, flowered for me last season, and is now coming back. So there's a massive difference in when the two flowered. This one must have flowered kind of mid-June, and this one's coming on mid-July, so there's a good month difference there. I am gutted that I missed this, but it is a perennial, so I'm hoping if I cut this back, that it'll come back for me next year, and I might actually get to see what the flowers are like. Now, this one is kind of the typical scabious pincushion one. I did plant some pink ones like this, but I also planted in the giant scabious this year, and I've only had, where is it? It's this one back here. I've only had 2 cuts from it, and the flowers are nice and big, although I'm finding that they don't last very long in the vase. Now that might just be when I'm cutting them, or because there's not that many flowers on the plants, it's not a very strong plant. But I am liking this. I thought the seed heads would be nicer for me to save, but again, I might have just missed when to cut them because they're too brown for me to do anything with now. But yeah, I'm hoping that this would be a perennial that I can try and save and see next year, because I just missed it this year, which is very upsetting. I will say though that by this time last year, when this was in its first year, this one was done. I wasn't being able to cut from it after kind of, I guess mid-June was when it was in its prime, and after that it just kind of got really big and wieldy and hard to find good stems, and the stems got skinnier, so I'd kind of said that's done by the middle of the summer. So I guess first year maybe comes up a bit earlier, but that's good. I mean, if you're planting every year, it kind of means you'll have a succession over the season. Yeah, but I didn't get to see this pink one at all, so I don't know what it looks like. I still like scabious though. So behind the scabious I had my Echinacea, and again these have come up at different times. So one of these was my one from last year, which I think is this one, and it was my green twister, and it came up first, and now I'm starting to get these pink ones. They're not doing great, they're not being very big, but I do like having them, and I think they kind of dry in a really weird way, which I like. It won't be to everyone's taste. It's not a pretty flower, it's definitely a weird flower when it dries. But I'm really liking these. What I will say is that they're not bushing up as much as I thought they would. So these are perennials. I should be able to dig these up and take them wherever I go next. But I will be planting them closer together because I think that the weed pressure here is quite bad, and they're not that bushy a plant, at least not the size that they're coming up for me. And I mean, that's second year growth and it's still not very bushy. Okay, so behind my Echinacea I have my Glad patch, my Gladiola, and again I missed most of these while I was in Scotland, and I'm gutted about that because this is one of my surprise favourites from last season. I really liked these when I grew them in the garden, so I bought more bulbs and I've put them in. I did have these in with my poppy, which if you watched my last video about my spring review was my favourite flower of the season. Unfortunately, I was hoping to get some of the poppy seed heads from them, but because I was away, I missed the right time to pick them, and by the time I came back, they were all kind of mushy and too much. Also, I didn't realise how big the poppy we're going to get, and I thought this would have been a good pairing, but it just wasn't. The poppy got so tall that my glads were stretching for the light, they were getting toppled over, they really weren't enjoying it at all, so I felt that actually stunted their growth a little bit. So next time I will definitely be putting poppy back in the garden, but I'll be putting them in a dedicated area just for themselves, possibly saying when they're finished I could plant in my African marigold or something that will come later in the season. But for my glads, they really didn't like it, so I'm gonna have to try again with them and have them in their own dedicated space next year, or possibly interplant them with something like my daffodil, which are going to finish really early and not be tall, so that these guys can push up and get nice and straight. I'm still having problem with them toppling over. I've tried a few different corralling methods, but because these were all intermixed with the poppy, that was really hard for me to do this year as well. But I still love Gladiola, they're so pretty. I know they're a bit of an old lady flower, but with the colours that are coming through, the coral, the deep purple, the kind of lavender colour, I think the more modern colours really look beautiful, and they really make an arrangement pop. So I'll definitely have these back in the garden, just figuring out what to interplant them with. Okay, next I have my chrysanthemum. Now I have two types of chrysanthemum in here. These are the kind of spray type, and this is the second year that I've had these in. So these are coming a lot earlier than I expected. They weren't really supposed to come till October. Chrysanthemum are kind of late blooming for me, so I've got some that start kind of September, October, and then I've got October, November, December blooming ones. These are what I like to pair at the very end with the last of my Dalia. Because I'm in zone 9B, I don't get a frost. Everything kind of keeps going right into December, which is great. But my spray ones are coming up early, but because it's so hot, they're browning before they even open. They're really not liking it very much. But I'm getting a lot of these coming already. So these are my yellow sprays, I've got some white sprays, and I've got a kind of purpley lavender colour, which is nice. But behind them, and new for this season, are these ones, and these are more of the heirloom chrysanthemum. These are going to be the big, huge, big flower heads on them. Now, when you grow these in Japan, which obviously this is a flower from Japan, it is the symbol of the emperor here in Japan, and there is a huge culture around growing these for competition. And usually they say you should grow 3 flowers per chrysanthemum plant, and that's because you cut them back so heavily, so that all of the energy goes into making 3 giant flowers. I'm not going to do that. I did cut them back a little bit to kind of make them bushier when they were much smaller, but I'm just going to let them keep coming. And like I say, these shouldn't really be blooming until kind of end of October into November time. I'm really excited to see these, and I'm going to be absolutely gutted if they don't survive transplant. Now, I bought these as plugs. I didn't grow these from seeds. It took me a really long time to find some nice ones. They're very hard to get here. Because there's such a culture of exclusivity, I guess, around the competition culture to do with chrysanthemum here. So I found it quite hard to source them, and I really don't want to lose them. But these guys are nowhere near blooming yet. Behind my chrysanthemum is mostly a weedy mess, but in here you will start to see some strawflower coming up. Now, I put in some of the strawflower that I grew last year, which are kind of the bright oranges and reds and yellows, and I really liked them, mostly for drying. They were really nice. But I decided to try some of the subtler colours this year as well. So these are more of the kind of lemonade-y yellow and the peachy, corally colour. So I just wanted to grow those and see if I liked them. Now, the first year I grew these, they got massive and bushy, so I've left quite a big space between them. And this time I put them in later because I did want them to be kind of end of season with my chrysanthemum and the last of my Dalia, and they're taking a lot longer to come up. I could have planted these a lot earlier and had them at the end of spring, and I decided not to, but I think that was possibly a wrong decision, and that if I grow these again, I will be putting them in earlier, and then starting them earlier for a spring crop, and then possibly putting in a second planting for a later crop, because I'm really missing having them, and I really like them for drying as well. I'm hoping these are going to transplant okay if I take out a big enough root ball with them, and that I will still get something off of them this season, but they are very, very slow, so if I grow them again, I'll definitely be starting them a lot earlier, because this just didn't work very well. They're so tiny. Okay, behind that I have sunflowers. Me and sunflowers. I grew sunflowers my first year in the garden, and they dominated. They shaded out the garden, they took over, they were too hard for me to harvest. I'm a wee person, sunflowers are not wee flowers. I was growing the branching variety because my garden is so small. It's only 4 meters by 5 meters, so I wanted to get as many flowers per kind of meter as I could. So it made a lot more sense to grow the branching ones, and they were just too much hassle. I didn't particularly like the flowers. They were hard to use because the flowers flop down instead of look up, so it makes it hard to use in arrangements. They had terrible pollen drop because a lot of the varieties I get here aren't the F1 varieties. F1 varieties are bred specifically for cut flowers and they have no pollen in them, so you don't have that issue. But the pollen drop on them was absolutely terrible, and I just really didn't like them. And I know that for a lot of flower growers to say that is like blasphemy because they are such a good seller. Everyone wants sunflowers. They're the sign of not only summer, but people like them into autumn, kind of around Halloween. Kind of pumpkin and sunflower decorations are really popular. I just didn't like them. But I ended up with this little gap in my garden. I thought, right, what can I get that grows quickly? Now you do get 40-day sunflowers. These were 60-day sunflower that I put in. So I thought, you know what? I'll put a few in and see if I can change my mind. I got a different variety. They were only supposed to be the 1 meter variety, and instead of branching this time, it was a single stem. So 1 seed, 1 flower. And I put them in, and they got massive. 1 meter my ass. These things were huge. They dominated, they shaded out the garden, and they all bloomed while I was away. So I didn't even get to get that. I came back and my husband had cut them all down and they were lying in the middle of the garden. He did then reseed some, and these ones are starting to come out, and they are closer to the meter, I'll give them that. And they're starting to get a flower on them, but I just don't like them. For 1 flower, this takes up a massive amount. I mean, I've got 3 Zenia plants in the same area as I have 2 sunflowers, and that's going to give me masses of flowers, and this is going to give me 2. I just don't know. I don't see the value in it at all. So it was my experiment to see if sunflowers could redeem themselves this year, and if I just changed my growing method or the variety, would I like them more? And the answer is no. Still don't like them. Grow some Rebeca instead. It's much better. No pollen. Okay, so next up I have my Zenias. I grew 2 varieties this year, only 2. Usually I grow more, but I decided that really I wanted to kind of zone in on what I liked and specifically what I could grow well. So this year I had the Queen Lime series because I love them, and these were Zinderella. The first time I'd grown Zinderella. Now, see if I can find them. My Queen Lime are looking great, but honestly, I don't have that many. This has not got as tall as in past years, and I don't have as many as in past years. And they're already slowing down and starting to look a bit diseased and getting the powdery mildew. And I think that's just because I wasn't here to cut them at the very beginning of the season. I wasn't deadheading them, and so the plants just didn't produce as much. Before, I was having problems where I tried to put 3 in a row, and they were getting too crowded, they were growing too big, and then that's kind of breeding ground for powdery mildew. So this time I only put in 2 rows, and of course they've not grown anywhere near as big. So I don't know if they were actually liking the competition and that's why they got so big. But I love the flowers that came on my Queen Lime. I just wish there had been more. These are an annual and they do not like to be transplanted, so this is probably the last cut of my Zenia I'm going to get. So I'm a little bit disappointed with that, but it is one that I'll try again next year because I know what they can look like if I just give them a bit more attention. These are the Zinderella. Now Zinderella are known to be a smaller type of Zenia, but they are supposed to be big and fluffy and kind of cupcakey in the middle, and I have not had a single one yet that is not a single. They've all come up singles. Now I know that some people like this kind of flower. It's just not, it's not my bag. So again, that's another one that I've tried and said, no, you know what, I don't really like that at all, and I'm not going to be growing it again next year. I think the colour is pleasant. I guess if you had other pastels to mix with it, it would look nice, but on its own, it's just a bit in between. It's not white, it's not pink, it's not really anything. It's just a bit meh. You could use it as a filler flower, but when I don't have very many other flowers in the garden, I'm looking for more of a focal. And when I can be getting beautiful, big, ruffly flowers like this on my Queen Lime, you know, they're just not compatible. So I won't be growing the Zinderella again. Don't like it. Nah. And then at the very end here, I have, again, mostly weeds. There are some geum in here. Now again, I started these back last September and I was really hoping they'd flower for me this year, and they've not. They're really, really tiny. They're not doing much. Obviously they're under a lot of weed pressure here. I'm not doing myself any favours. But they've not done anything, and this is really something that I wanted for that kind of sparkle element. You know, they're not a huge flower, they're definitely not a focal flower, but I just love them. I think they're so fun. And so these are the tangerine ones as well. So they're kind of a pop of bright orange colour just kind of floating about on the outside going, hey, look at me, I'm so fun. So I'm upset that these didn't come, but again, these are a perennial. So if I can move them, I'll try and move them. Although I think only about 5 or 6 have actually survived here. They've not liked it at all. Yeah, and behind that is where I planted my Glob Thisle, and I thought there was nothing. But I've got this one, it's just so tiny. So obviously I planted that at the wrong time and it's not liked it. That's maybe one that I did direct seed that, so I think I quite like the idea of that one. Being Scottish, anything that looks a bit like a thistle I like. An orange thistle, great. But that's one I'll maybe try again, but I might start at home and put it in as more of an established plant and see if that helps. Again, all of these have been neglected, both by me going away and because the garden has kind of become overrun while I've been trying to find a new garden to move into. So a lot of this is probably just neglect on my part. But it's one I'll try again because it's kind of cute and fun, but it just didn't do, neither of these did what I wanted them to do. But I haven't given up on them yet. And it's much the same story with my Dalia. My Dalia are coming, but they came much earlier while I was away. I wasn't deadheading them, and so they stopped producing. I came back, I cut them back hard, and they are now starting to kind of leaf up. They're giving me a lot more flowers. They are starting to come. I am finding this year, though, that the flowers are much smaller, and specifically this kind of light purple one at the back here. This one. Now, last year, this was my best producer. It started producing the earliest in the season. It went through to the end of the season. It gave me the most flowers. I didn't love the flowers, but it just gave me so many. And they were the biggest one that I had in the garden. And this year, they're not. They're coming through. They're already yellowing on the stalk before they've even opened bud. And they're just not doing as well. And I think that might have something to do with the fact that I didn't divide the tuber. So I dug up the tubers. They were all looking big and healthy, and I didn't really need more plants because I had nowhere to put them. So I just put them back in. But I'm starting to think now that a bit like daffodils, if you don't separate your daffodil bulbs, the daffodil puts up lots of leaves but doesn't put up any flowers because they're overcrowded, and that's why it's important to go in every kind of 4 or 5 years and separate your daffodil bulbs. Maybe it's the same with these. I need to look more into that. But I think maybe this year when I'm moving garden, I'm going to have to sacrifice a lot of these, which is gutting because I usually get my best Dalia towards the end of the season, and I'm gonna have to dig them all up. Whether they'll survive that, I don't know. I'm really nervous about it, but I'm gonna try. But it might be a case of once I do that, I'm gonna have to then dig them up again once all the foliage has died back and separate out those tubers to make sure that I'm getting better flowers next year, because I'm really finding that that's disappointing considering what I had last year. Again, they kind of toppled over a lot while I was away. I did put this corral up, but I think I was a bit too late in doing it. They are looking a bit better now, but I have so many twisty stems down the bottom that it's just a bit of a mess this year. So I really need to work on how to deal with my Dalia. I'm getting them, they're coming now. I missed a lot, I didn't deadhead, it's made the plant suffer. And maybe I should have been separating my tuber last spring, or last autumn even. But they're coming. Let's see how many more I get in the next couple of weeks before I have to dig them up. But this will be one of the last things I take out because I want them to be in there for as long as possible. I might try and move them, just like dig up the whole tuber, because I don't think they put out much roots underneath the tubers. So I might try and just dig up a whole chunk and put them back in and see if I can keep them coming in the next garden. Yeah, oh, spoiler, there is another garden. This was my Bergamont. I planted 3 or 4 of these and only one of them really survived and gave me some flowers, but again it flowered while I was away, and when I came back it still had some flowers on it, but it was too far for me to cut them for cut flowers, and I thought I'd leave them for seed heads, but it very quickly got hot and instead of producing seed head it just crisped. Yeah, it is one that I'll try again though, because I feel like I didn't actually get to see it and see how it performed. I was expecting it to get a lot bigger than that though. So yeah, I'll try that one again, but I don't know what happened this year. This is my salvia. Now this has been in for 3 years now, 2 years, 3 years, and it's still pretty small. I do like to cut it and I use it more as a foliage. I leave all the leaves on it and I use it as a foliage in bouquets and stuff, and I am liking that. I did think it would get bigger, and it's not really done very much. Can you see this? Here. Maybe if I just leave it for a few more years it would get bigger and more usable, but as it is, it's okay. I don't love it, but I don't hate it. So I'll try and transplant it, and if it takes, it takes, and if it doesn't, I'm not that upset about that. Okay, and the last line is my Snapdragon, and these have been a surprise in learning and just reminds me that I have to be aware of my specific growing climate and not what I'm seeing other people do on Instagram and stuff, because the growing conditions are so different in each place. So I see people growing these mostly as a kind of very early summer, right through the summer crop, and that is just not it for me. I planted these guys out in January, well before my first frost date, and I put a low tunnel over them, and they were killing it in very early spring, to the point that I included them in my spring flower review because I couldn't not. It did mean that I had a lot more spike flower, and I was finding it quite hard to make up nice arrangements and bouquets because everything at that point was a spike. I had my stalk at the same time and something else that I can't remember now. So I did feel like I had too much spike flower, but these just don't handle the heat well. Once I cut them back for the first time, took my first cuts from them, the second flush that came was okay. But when I get into the summer, the stems are just so skinny. They don't last well in the vase. They're not giving me nice full heads. I tend to get 2 or 3 flowers on the top of each, and that's about it. They look a bit scraggly. They're just not very nice. They don't get the tall stems on them anymore. So I really realized that I need to be growing these as a spring flower and just as a spring flower. The other thing I've realized is a little bit heartbreaking, and that is that the best variety for me to be growing are the Potomac series. I loved my Potomac orange. They have just released a lavender. I don't know if you guys have seen this. It's beautiful. It's definitely in the color scheme that I like, and that would go with a lot of the things that I'm planning for the next garden. The last 3 years has been me figuring out how to grow things, but more importantly, what I want to grow. You know, I've grown a lot of things that other people grow and found that I just don't use them, much like the sunflower. Calendula is one I outright hated. I didn't like harvesting it. It was sticky, it was gross. I just didn't see, you know, they look beautiful on the packet, but just for me, I wasn't using them, and it was just taking up space because there's no point in growing something that you're then not going to use. And that's what I'm finding with a lot of these Snapdragon, is I'm putting in what I can find, but they're not what I want to use. They're not matching my color scheme. I had the pink soda. This is one of the pink soda here. See if I can find one. These came up. This is my pink soda. And this came up really early in the spring season, and I just didn't have anything to go with it. It's such a weird color. It's almost like a translucent, glowing baby pink and white. And on its own, it looks lovely, but I found it really hard to match with anything else that I had in the garden. So it was just kind of going to waste. And as you can see, it's on such a skinny stem that once you get much longer than that, it just doesn't hold its weight up at all. I mean, that one actually looks quite pretty as a mini flower, but there's not much you can do with it. So I'm finding that really the only ones I want to grow are the Potomac. Heartbreaking because I can't find them in Japan. I just can't source them anywhere. And I have spent hours and hours, wasted hours of my life staring at computer screens trying to find someone that will sell me Potomac Snapdragon. I want the orange and the lavender are the ones I'm really after, and I just can't find them anywhere. So I don't know what I'm going to put in. I really like the raspberry ripple type ones that I had at the beginning of the season. They were nice and they went really well with my vintage stock and my Peggy Wonder tulip. I really liked that combination a lot. And for a spring, to get such dark colours in spring, I know it's not everyone, you know, it's usually pastels and stuff in springtime, but you know, I'm making these for me in my house and that's what I like. So I might grow those once again, but for the rest, I feel like I put a lot of effort in and I'm always expecting the nice big long stems and I just don't get them here. And then after kind of even early June, once I've taken that second cut from them, they just come back too weak and too scraggly for me to actually be using at all. So I think next time I grow them, I'll grow them as a spring flower and then I'll rip them up and get something else in their place, because that's 3 years that I've been waiting for them to come back and give me a second flush, and they never quite do it. And it's a big chunk of a small garden that is just not producing anything that I can actually use. So I think I've just got to bite the bullet next year and say, no, these need to come up. And that's it. That's my summer review for the garden this year. I'm so sad that it's coming so early. I feel like there's still a lot of potential in the garden. And again, like years past, there's stuff that I wanted to happen that didn't happen. My Geum, my Sweet William, my Lisianthus didn't really do anything for me. I'm not giving up on those ones though. Sunflower are definitely out. When I put in my Cosmos and my Zenia, I'm probably going to plant them closer together and get them in a lot earlier in the season. I just need to be careful about what I'm pairing stuff with, because as I've learned with my Gladiola and my peony, my poppy, it's not always a good match. Having said that, my tulip and my Dalia, that was a great match. They perfectly lined up with each other, so that is maybe something that I'll incorporate into a new garden, is that pairing as well. I have had some nice arrangements. I haven't had as many buckets as I would like. I haven't had as many buckets as I had last year, but that's to be expected. I was away for 6 weeks over the beginning of summer, and that's when I really needed to be tending these plants, deadheading them and trying to get that big summer flush to come on. There's a lot of weeds in here too. And that's not just me. If you look around, you can see everyone's kind of letting their garden go. You know, a lot of people put a lot of work into these gardens. Some people have had them for almost 12 years. And a lot of it is kind of end of season because we're so hot here. They are putting things in for end of season and over winter. And so then to be told with very short notice that you've got to be out by the end of August, beginning of September, you know, it really crushes you a little bit. All of the work, the planning and the money that you've put into growing these things, and you're just going to have to lose the whole crop. And looking around me, I can see that a lot of people have just thrown up their hands and said, well, why bother? I've never seen the gardens look like this. They're completely overgrown with grass, and it's quite sad. And it's sad for me because I've put in the work equally, but I think I'm one of the few people on this allotment under the age of 65, and most of those people live in these houses around me, and they don't always have transport. And so for them to close down this garden, that's it. They don't have the option. The garden that I have found, which I'll talk about in another video, is far, and I don't drive, so I come here on my bicycle every day, and I'm not going to be able to do that. I'm going to be 100% reliant on my husband driving me up there when I need to go, and it being a family thing now. And I don't know if that's going to work. I don't know if that's going to be sustainable. We've kind of given ourselves a year to see if that's going to work, and if it doesn't, then it might just be that I have to stop as well. But literally the closest other allotment that I could find, there were a few around. One of them had a 1-year waiting list. Another one I went to and it looked amazing. It had a little kind of clubhouse. You could rent your tools. It had water, and I went to inquire about it and was told that they're closing that one down as well because they're building a new subway line under it, so that will be closed as of April. Those were both within cycling distance. This other one is a half-hour drive. So for me, it's sad because of all the work that I've put into it, but I have another option. I feel really terrible for the amount of old people here where this was not only a hobby for them to do, it was exercise for them to do, and it was a social thing. You know, everyone talks to each other, everyone knows each other. And I feel like that's a real lifeline that's been taken away from them, and it is heartbreaking. So, yeah, that sucks. I'm not done with this garden yet. However, I still have a few more weeks. I'm going to get as many flowers out of it as I can. I will take you to the new garden and we're going to go through soil prep and stuff for that. But also I'm going to take you through what I'm taking from this garden, what I'm going to try and dig up, and then seeing if that actually works. You can watch me try and get the big root balls out of here and get them up into the new garden once that garden is prepared. So stick with me, hit the subscribe button below and see how that goes. And we are starting a whole new garden. Maybe I'll have it a bit more organized this time. But please hit the subscribe button and follow along to see how the next step in the adventure goes. If you want to see everything that I make with my flowers, you can check out my Instagram, which is From the Witch's Garden, and there's a link to that below. And I will see you guys next week. Bye.